for each of these primary keys, they will actually belong to a relation themselves. Okay, so we are going to create a relation for invoice, and we are going to create a relation for product. Okay. Okay, so there we started with two relations, each for my primary keys in that first normal form relation. Now we just have to go and decide what fits in with, or what fits best with these relations. Now our goal now is to identify partial functional dependencies. What is a partial dependency again? It means it's only partially dependent on the key. My key at this stage is the invoice number and the product code. So anything that is only dependent on one of those is partially dependent. All right. Now let's take the invoice date. Is invoice date dependent on the invoice number and the product code?
No, it's dependent on the invoice.
It's only dependent on the invoice. Right, doesn't matter what products are on the invoice. If the invoice takes place today, the invoice date will be today's date. Okay, so that means that we will have to put the invoice date inside invoice. Right, so invoice date is done. The employee number. Is the employee number dependent on the, or let's ask it like this. If I have the invoice number, can I actually identify which employee has done that, has taken part in that invoice? Yes. If I have a product code, can I identify an employee based on the product code? No. So where must employee code go at this stage? Inside invoice, because based on the invoice number, I can identify who the employee is that has taken part there. Right, so employee code is sorted. Customer number. If I look at an invoice number, can I identify who the customer is that has taken part in the invoice? Invoice number? Yes, I can. If I look at a product code, does that give me an indication who the customer is? No. So customer number must also go into invoice, and together with customer number, we will have all the other customer information also goes in there. Let's look at the description. If I have an invoice number or the description of a product, does that depend on the invoice number? Definitely not. On what does it depend? On the product code. If I have a price of a product, does that depend on the invoice? No, it depends on the product code. Right, so the description and the price has been taken care of. Now for quantity. Does the quantity depend on the invoice? Yes, because it depends on this specific invoice, how many of the product have we sold. But is it only dependent on the invoice? No, it's that same question. If I say, on invoice 2, we sold 3. 3 what? All right, we want to know 3 of how, what? Product. All right, if I say, I sold 2 chairs, on which invoice? All right, so quantity is fully dependent on my primary keys that we have identified there. Quantity is dependent on the invoice and the product.
Yes.
All right, and the same for the line total. It's also dependent on both of them. If you have an attribute that is fully dependent on your 2 keys, those attributes stay with those 2 keys. All right, so we will have now, for example, an entity called products on invoice, or invoice line is one that lots of people use. Okay.
So that's similar to it.
Right. So those 2 attributes have now gone or stayed with the keys in this table. All right, very important to show your keys in the table. If there's no primary key, it is still in 0 normal form. Okay, now let's quickly look at invoice. Which normal form do you think invoice is currently in? Do we have any repeating groups in invoice? No, because there is a unique primary key and so on.
Does that make you a bigger rec? Or
is there any partial dependencies? Is there any attribute in that table that is only partially dependent? Okay, so is there any transitive dependencies? Yes, because customer number can actually exist on its own. All right. So this relation is in second normal form. Product. In which normal form do you think product is? That is in third normal form. There is no partial dependencies. There's no transitive dependencies. Invoice line. In which normal form is invoice line? Also in third normal form. Quickly, let's just see we said there's still transitive dependencies. Now, if we look at invoice number, a transitive dependency means that that attribute is actually not dependent. The key can tell you something about the other attribute, but it's not dependent on that attribute. For example, if I look at customer name is actually dependent on the customer number. Right. And the invoice number can tell us which customer number has taken part on the invoice, but the invoice number does not determine the customer number. Okay? So that is a transitive dependency. So this whole cluster of attributes must actually go to their own entity. Just very important with transitive dependencies. The moment you take out a transitive dependency, you need to leave something in that hole that you have created. And that something that we leave in the hole is called a foreign key. Right, so we do need to keep that key as the foreign key where we take out a transitive dependency. Okay, so in invoice we left the customer number as a foreign key. But invoice is still just in second normal form. Why?
There's a lot of resources available.
Because of the employee. Okay, so the employee is the same situation as the customer. I can, through the invoice number, determine who the employee was that did this invoice, but the employee is not, the invoice number is not determining the employee. Okay, so the employee code will also just stay as a foreign key, and we will then create an employee table where we will have an employee code and an employee name as a third normal form table. Just before I create that one, just one thing about third normal form as well. This customer table is also still not in third normal form because we have some attributes that is still not in the most primary form. Because an address actually contains more information than just an address. It can be a house number, a street name, a city name, and so forth. So you can break that up into more. Okay, so that means invoice is also now in third normal form, employee is in third normal form, and customer is in third normal form. And from that, you can actually draw your ERD.